non-executive-directors.com Brexit debate. My name is Brian Epp, and I'll be your host this evening. But before we start, we'd just like to send a special thank you to Raj Matharu, the chairman of the Grange Hotels Group, for kindly sponsoring this event this evening. We would also like to thank the ICSA, an important partner of ours, for continuing to build training and development initiatives for non-executive directors, and we're delighted with that partnership. On Thursday, the 23rd of June, the UK electorate faces its most significant decision in more than a generation, whether to remain in the EU or to leave the Union. Non-executive-directors.com is pleased to have two excellent speakers this evening to make their case to members. Representing Remain, Oliver Letwin, MP for West Dorset, and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster in David Cameron's government, Oliver has overall responsibility for government policy and has been an influential and often behind-the-scenes key player in the development of government initiatives since the coalition government and as well in the existing government. Melanie Hampton, representing the Leave side, is the founder and CEO of Alexander Miller, a UK insurance broker. Melanie is very active in her community and in voluntary organizations and was lead governor of the ambulance services and also serves as deputy chairperson of finance for a large London borough. We have asked both representatives to make an 8 to 10 minute case for their side and to follow it up with 15 to 20 minutes of questions and answers. And following that, refreshments will be served. So, Oliver, would you like to start, please?
Thank you very much, Brian. Can I just check? Can you hear that? Excellent. The first thing I should say is that about 33 years ago, I first became interested in this subject. I don't know whether other people in the room have been interested in it for that long. Certainly at that time, most people in our country were totally bored by it, and I remember addressing audiences that were going to sleep in even larger numbers than my speeches usually induce. And the reason I became interested in it is because at that stage I became aware that there were two phenomena in the EU. There was a very clear tendency to create what has now become the single market, was then seen as an enlargement and deepening of the common market. And at the same time, as I began then at a very particular moment in my life to read the various treaties and the other foundational documents and the jurisprudence, I became clear that there was a movement being fostered from the beginning, but with increasing force, to try to create not only a monetary but also a fiscal and political union, the so-called ever closer union. And you'd be very unusual, incidentally, if you were to do this, but you can go and read the pamphlet that I wrote at that time called Drift to Union, a pamphlet which probably had the smallest circulation of any pamphlet in recorded British history. And what I argued then was that the natural resting point for Britain, where British interest lay, was in avoiding becoming part of the emerging monetary, fiscal and political union that was going to become a United States of Europe, but to remain part of an outer circle around that, which was a free trading area. And in a rather sort of unfashionable and boring way, for the last 33 years, I have continued to take this view. And I take it today. But there's an enormous thing that's happened, which I think is the thing that's been least discussed in the course of this whole referendum debate, which is that we've reached an agreement, an international law decision, which has been deposited at the UN, and which makes it abundantly clear for the very first time in the evolution of the EU, first of all, that it is, and I'm quoting, a multi-currency area. Secondly, that the countries that want to become part not just of monetary union but of fiscal and political union are perfectly at liberty to do so. But third, that is, and I quote again, voluntary. And fourth, that some countries, and we're named specifically, like us, do not wish to be part of that and don't need to be. And fifth, that the clause which has been most often used from the preamble to the treaties by what was the European Court of Justice, is now the Court of Justice of the European Union, to justify expansionist interpretations of the treaties, the so-called ever closer union clause, which says exactly that, ever closer union, first of all, and I quote, is not a legal basis for expansionist interpretations of the treaties, and secondly, and I quote again, does not apply to the UK. What is the importance of this? It is that for the first time, this country now has the possibility before it of doing precisely what for the last 33 years I have wanted this country to be able to do, namely to remain part of the single market, but not ever to be dragged into being part of monetary union, and hence not to be dragged into what I regard as the inevitable corollary of monetary union if it's made to work, which is fiscal and political union, as we've seen through the failures in Greece and elsewhere. And that seems to me an ideal resting point for our country. Why do I think that? Well, I think at first because I think our country is a successful democracy, and therefore I don't want to lose the ability to run our democracy on our own, which this allows us to do without being part of a fiscal, political, or monetary union. And secondly, because I'm a free trader. And the last thing I want to say, though I almost hope I don't need to say it in this audience, is that it seems to me that free trade, the deepest possible free trade, is evidently economically beneficial to everyone. There's been an enormous amount of discussion in the referendum debate which might have sounded like somebody saying, and maybe some people meant to say, that free trade can only be advantageous to one side or the other. This is evident nonsense. If we all still were in the condition that our cavemen ancestors were in, and had to produce all that we consumed ourselves in our own families or very narrow tribal groups, we would all be in the condition they were in of great poverty. What has generated prosperity for mankind, not over 10 years or 50 or 100 years, but over millennia, has been the division of labor and the engagement in trade. That's what makes us well off. Free trade is therefore structurally advantageous to this country. Of course, there are very strong arguments about our economy today which make free trade even more important to us, but structurally it will go on forever and a day being important to our prosperity and that of all other nations on earth. Why then, if we have the opportunity to be part of the deepest free trade single market that exists on the face of the earth today, without the entailment of being dragged into something we don't want to be, or many of us don't want to be dragged into, why would we forsake that golden opportunity? That is, to my mind, the simple and the clear explanation of why it is in the advantage of this country today to vote to remain in the EU, to make the international law decision therefore a reality, to see it incorporated in treaties, and to proceed in a way which I think will do the greatest good we can to the future prosperity of our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Melanie?
Can you all hear me? Yeah, cool. The EU is like a sausage. When you realize what's inside it, you don't want it anymore. And this is the problem. The EU that Britain joined in 1973 was a trading partnership. But over the years, the EU has morphed into something completely different, with political integration at its heart. We are one country, but time and time again, the other 27 vote against us. Every year, I believe that our political power diminishes. Unelected commissioners in charge of our destiny. We have lost our sovereignty and our independence. And £350 million a week is a very big price tag for no power and no influence. As the EU has embraced new member states, the more prosperous northern countries have become a magnet for those who want a better life. They have also become the paymaster for the much poorer countries. For every £2 that we contribute to the EU, we only get £1 back. I believe that we can no longer afford the imbalance and that the EU is simply unsustainable. Let's look at Greece. At one stage, they grew fat on subsidies. They maxed out on the credit card, giving benefits to their citizens that their economy could not afford. Greece is a financially ticking time bomb. They are trapped by the euro, huge unemployment, and a deteriorating quality of life. Greece, too, has seen the human tragedy of mass immigration from the Middle East and Africa. Desperate people undertaking terrible journeys to get to Germany and Britain to enjoy the generous benefits that we give. Our hospitals, our schools, our very own heritage are under pressure from too many people. We are now told that 79 million Turkish people will have free movement. There simply isn't enough money to pay for everyone. The institution of the EU is imperfect, but it's now too big to change. A dinosaur that has grown so large that the very small brain takes a very long time to get the tail to move. A beast that will eventually die. The Common Agricultural Policy is a flawed economic system. Complex rules and regulations not in the interest of British farmers. I've listened to distressed Cornish fishermen talking about the EU's fishing quotas has done to their livelihoods. They can no longer fish as they please off their own coastal waters. The EU imposed restrictions to protect fishing stocks, but they say with great bitterness that the Belgians fish the water 24/7. Dutch boats may pay their taxes in Britain, but they land their catches in the Netherlands. It's the Dutch that get the profit, not the British. Talk to any business, and they point a finger at Brussels over the cost of regulation and bureaucracy. So either we stay with something that has diminishing benefits to the people of this country, or we leave and seize the opportunities. I think the decision to stay or to go comes down to what we have to win against what we have to lose. If we leave the EU, I do not believe that there will be a damage to trade. Take my own industry. I work in insurance, and London is one of the biggest insurance centres in the world. We are very good at what we do. Customers come to London for breadth of cover, our ability to pay claims, our pricing. That is not going to change. We mustn't forget that we're a huge market for the EU. We all know, we've read the press, that we actually import more than we export. Let's take an example of the food industry. In 2015, we exported £7.5 billion of foodstuffs to the EU, but we imported 18 billion from them. There is no way that EU countries would want to lose that market and impose high tariffs upon us. Productivity and domestic demand play a very strong part in financial confidence, and I do not believe that ultimately this will be affected by leaving the EU. Let's have a look at what we have to gain. I want to regain our independence for that ever-encroaching EU and our masters in Brussels. 60% of our laws are dictated by the EU. The EU commissioners now want to take away our seat in the UN Council. Yes, sidelined by our masters and powerless to have our say. We have a much respected legal system, but 77% of the cases taken to the European Court are lost. We have British laws, but EU ones now take precedent over our own. That can't be right. Look at the Home Secretary, Theresa May, and her many battles with the courts of Europe. Tied hands with extradition, rights of violent criminals above victims, and most fundamental of all, control of our borders. The terrible carnage in Brussels and Paris show us that a small minority can easily move around the melting pot that is of Europe undetected. Open borders with millions of migrants moving around is a gift for terrorist cells and those who seek to harm us, to maim and to kill. I was born in London and I am very proud to be British. We live in a tolerant and open society, but we must preserve who we are. We must secure our borders and control who enters our country. It is extraordinary to suggest that if we leave, that we would not be safe. We won't. We are an island, so we can close the routes in and out. We have a highly respected and excellent intelligence services. And of course, we will continue to share that data because it's win-win for everyone. We will always have strong bonds of friendship with our European friends and allies. But now is the time to go it alone, to be ourselves, masters of our own destiny. Let us look at all the things that we do so well. IT, our creative industries, our financial services, our biomedical businesses. We live in a wealthy country with high wages, so we compete on our talent, our innovation, and our centuries-old ability to always take the profit and to make the commission. None of this is going to stop if we leave the EU. My children tell me that we become more of a global society day by day. We are an ingenious nation, and this global trading area has so many opportunities for us. Freedom to be ourselves, to pursue excellence and innovation, and it would release and inspire both young and old alike. Let's leave the backward-looking bitching and the boating blocks to Brussels and concentrate on those new markets, such as India, where our EU affiliation has made it harder to trade. I want to leave you with one last thought. This is like a divorce. I had the misfortune to be divorced. It was a bad marriage for many years, not wanting to stay but worried about the consequences of leaving. Was I really brave enough to go it alone? All those years of unhappiness and negative feelings. But then one day I grasped that nettle, and the worst bit was making the decision to go, to say I am going to leave. We started the process of divorce. It took time, it was painful, but we negotiated our way through it, compromising to find a solution, all stronger. And that step into the unknown was worth it for the brighter future. Ladies and gentlemen, we are a great and proud nation who have never shirked from our responsibilities or failed to stand up for who we are. This is our chance to take back our control, to control our laws, to control our trade, and most important of all, to control our destiny.
Thank you, Melanie. We'd now like to open the floor up for any questions. We have another mic here for anyone. Lizzie, can you pass it to... Thank you.
Hello, I'm Christina Patterson. I'm a journalist and broadcaster and also a non-exec. Just for your interest, the Creative Industries Federation recently did a poll of its members, and 96% wanted to remain in the EU. You talked about the creative industries, it being stronger to leave. Well, 96% of people in the creative industries want to remain in the EU.
But what I'm talking about is using that talent that they have to a more global market.
Sure, but they don't want to, but that's fine. I'm just making
I'm
the point.
sure that 96% of the... I mean, we've got our debate. We have got our vote on Thursday. I don't know, you're not going to know if 96% of those people... I would be surprised. This is about a debate. I personally believe my kids who are 20, 22 and 26... I want this to be a better world for them where they have a bigger and global market, not a restricted EU market. That's my opinion, yours is different. I cannot believe that 90% of the whole of the IT industry, well, in fact, I know people who definitely believe what I do.
Thank you, Melanie. Oliver, did you want to reply? Oh, sorry, another question here.
Hi, I'm Sarita Jha. This lady here. There were a couple of things that I think when you made your case, that probably there's some facts that are omitted. One is when you said Turkey, for example, 79 million people ready to jump the border to come over to the UK. I think we need to put that in perspective. If you look at the population, look at the demographics, probably only 45 million are in that age group that would actually want to emigrate, of which you would take 20% or 30% of that would actually emigrate. And those who do come to Germany, Netherlands, the UK, they are not people, not 100% of them are looking to just come here for benefits. They are pharmacists, they are musicians, they are doctors, they are teachers. There was a film in the Human Rights Watch Film Festival that was aired here in London about a group of refugees that came to Europe. And they were from Syria, and they were not here for benefits. They were here to make a difference in society and to be accepted in that society. So I think that there's some fact of 79 million are not coming over. That's a little bit of a misnomer there.
Thank you. Melanie?
So how many would be suitable to come to this country?
Having done business in Turkey for about 8 to 10 years, I think there's 50 million of that demographic. Of the 50 million, you would reduce it to maybe probably 25 or 30 million that actually would, let's say, the ability.
So how many people do you think that our services can sustain? 79 billion, it's a huge and enormous country. You're saying 45 million. How many do you think is going to be acceptable?
But I think that, no, when you're making the case, I think when you make the case, I think that you need to, the 79 million is a number that is the entire population.
Okay.
So just to put that in perspective.
I don't believe that this country can afford the level of migration that we've had. It is an opinion, it is my opinion, that's what I believe. Turkey is a very large country. Turkey is not as rich a country as we are. We're a magnet, and that is quite right. If I was in the same position, I'd want to do the same thing. I have no problem with people trying to make a better life for themselves. I'm just saying, I don't think our infrastructure can sustain the level of migration that we have had. And Turkey would put a large extra proportion on that, on our public services, and I don't think we can afford that.
I just want to intrude a sort of significant fact into this discussion, which is there are many, many facts which are contestable as we go through this debate, but this is just a simple fact. The fact is that the UK has a veto as a member of the EU over whether Turkey joins or not. So that's an argument we can have after the referendum, and we can continue having for many years, and the country may make one decision or the other decision. But it is a fact that, as a matter of fact, we can stop Turkey entering at any time.
Thank you, Oliver. This gentleman behind.
John Lawrence, good evening. A lot of the recent debates have focused on this 350 million, but actually that's quite a small figure. The thing I'd like to concentrate on is it the case that, as The Economist says recently, that the UK has grown at 2.1% on average every year since we joined the EU, which exceeds the growth rate of the large EU countries and exceeds that of the US? And the second point is, could either of you begin to quantify the benefits of being in this special place that Mr. Letwin describes, which is a member of we have access to the market, but we're not tied into the euro, and we're not heading for fiscal union and political union in that sense. So we have a special status. We've grown faster than anybody else because of that, and we attract inward investment. Could you quantify what that inward investment side of it would be?
No doubt you'll get different answers from two of us, but let me try to answer that. The first point is, there isn't anybody here, and there isn't anybody in the world, that can accurately estimate the net present value over a very long time in history going forward of doing something as a nation. That's just not a calculation anyone can make. The second point is the 350 million, which incidentally is a gross figure and is netted off against receipts, so it's rather smaller, taken either way, gross or net, is utterly tiny compared to the question of whether we grow at what sound like very similar rates, 1.5% or 2.1% or 2.5%, because our GDP is very large. If you grow £2 trillion by 2%, or if you grow £2 trillion by 1.5%, a little compound arithmetic will show you very quickly that numbers like 175 million or 350 million disappear in a trice. The third point is, while it's quite impossible to quantify the long-term effects of a decision of this kind, we do know two things. The first thing is, if on the 23rd of June, as they may, our fellow countrymen vote to leave, on the 24th of June, and I think you described this as painful, I think it's right, for a period, at least, there will be a very considerable economic effect. And that you will see, I can't quantify it now, but you'll see it quantified in the world's currency markets and the world's stock markets and so on. And that will be painful. Now, the argument of the Leave side is it's a pain worth going through. The reason why I don't think it is a pain worth going through comes back to the point above all that you were making finally, which is the question of foreign direct investment into the UK. I spent quite a lot of my time as a minister in China and in India, because I'm aware, as my colleagues in the cabinet are, that the world increasingly is going to be dominated by those two countries, and our relationship with them is crucial. And it's important to think yourself into the mindset of someone in Mumbai or someone in Shanghai that's trying to make a decision about investing, for example, in our automotive industry. We have, as it happens, the second most profitable and the second greatest exporting automotive industry in Europe today. Almost all of it is funded by direct investment from overseas. And almost all of it consists in a massive chain of export and import. Almost every car we produce is produced out of massive amounts of imported goods, mostly coming from other EU countries, and almost every car that we export is exported to the EU. Remove us from the single market and ask yourself the question, will someone thousands of miles away who can barely distinguish between Europe and Africa and America, and certainly cannot distinguish between the UK and Europe with any clarity, are they actually going to be investing in a small offshore island if they're precluded from the single market by preference to investing in the Netherlands or in Germany? And the answer to that, I have to tell you, I think is pretty conclusively no. And that will affect our ability as an economy to trade and to trade competitively. So it isn't just a question of the relationships we eventually forge with the EU or with the 53 countries that the EU has free trade agreements with, all of which we will have to renegotiate, or indeed with China or India. It's also a question of how much those countries invest in us and enable us in the next decade or two to export and trade profitably.
Ford Transit vans are no longer made in the UK. That stopped in 2013. They're made in Turkey now, and we import an awful lot of them. One of the things that I think is really important in answer to your question is somebody signposted me to reading the 5 Presidents' paper, which I did. It's there, it's an EU document, it's for everyone to read. This was produced last year, and the rhetoric there from Jean-Claude Juncker is pretty terrifying, really. It talks about fiscal union, an ever-increasing union, because the EU has to move forward in one direction. And I believe that this is the time to move in a different direction. We want to talk about trading. The EU itself says that 90% of the trading opportunities are in countries outside the EU. I go back to the simple point. I want my kids to trade globally, not just with the EU, that has so many structural problems. All my friends who are in the city, trading, dealing with investments and finance, say exactly the same thing to me. Well, we all know it doesn't really work. We all know it's not sustainable, but we can't lose because in the short term, it may make a slight difference. I genuinely believe that we should be bigger and better and go for that big global market because it is out there. And I go back to the point, people are not going to stop coming to Lloyd's of London and its ancillary market because we're outside the EU.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I have one statement and 2 questions. The statement is, I presume if that faraway person doesn't know the difference between Europe, Africa, and North America, and I'm not sure I'd really want his money to be injected into some investment in this country. That was the statement. The question is, Oliver, if you so believe that any forward projection is a nonsense, did you not look upon the Treasury's statements and projections of a reduction in GDP per family of £4,000 by 2030 with a little bit of skepticism and concern that they would state such a thing, when we all know that to be a nonsense? And the other statement, the other question relates to, I'll think about it when I get to it. I'd like to hear the question
Senior moment
to
there.
in the second one.
First point is, I'm not saying that the investor in Shanghai or Mumbai can't tell the difference between those 3 continents. What I'm saying is, in trying to make an investment decision, they have very considerable difficulty distinguishing where they should make that investment decision, and they basically think of Europe as a whole, and the idea that they're going to invest the same kinds of quantity in just Britain rather than looking to the European market is therefore fanciful. And just over and over again in talking to investors in those countries, and indeed elsewhere, I find them saying that, and I think that is what will happen. The Treasury was not trying to forecast what I think was being asked for here, which is what is going to happen to Britain over the next several centuries, and therefore the total present value that we're talking about for our economy if we go one direction or another. There's none of us alive who can do that. What they were trying to do is something perfectly sensible, and I don't think it matters terribly, incidentally, exactly what the number is. They're trying to do what the Bank of England was trying to do, what the OECD was trying to do, what the IMF has tried to do, what very large numbers of economists have tried to do, which is to get a sense of the scale, which is more or less as good as you can do in economics, as you and I both know, of the short and medium-term effects of a decision to leave. And the truth is, it is a jump in the dark. The argument for leave is that after that jump in the dark, and after the short-term pain and costs, there will be some blissful upside. Now, that's what I struggle to see.
Right.
I struggle to see what the argument is that counteracts the undoubted difficulties in the short term with some huge long-term advantage. And that comes back to the question, what relationship are we going to have with this single market? If we're going to have a Norwegian relationship with it, where essentially we buy into all the rules and regulations in return for complete access to the single market, which they have, I don't see that we get the control that we were hearing about earlier as the purported advantage. That takes you to the Swiss arrangement, where you have somewhat of a serious access to the single market. You don't make all the payments, you don't accept all the rules, but you are somewhat precluded from the single market too. It's a sort of midway position. You're losing something very real. Or we could move to a sort of Canada-style arrangement where there is a free trade agreement, but where there are, for example, 36% tariffs on agriculture and reasonably high tariffs on various services and so on. Now, of course, if the nation votes to leave, we will have to try to negotiate some solution or fall back on the WTO. My point is, you can't get the kind of participation in the single market we have by being members for free. You can only get it by taking on the burdens of membership, and everything short of that, therefore, loses some of the advantages of single market participation. And I think those advantages are so great that as long as we're not going to be dragged into a fiscal, political, and monetary union, and the agreement is totally clear about that, it's very well worthwhile to remain part of the single market.
Which brings me to the second question. Isn't there a lot of legal debate between whether this UN document that's in front of the UN is valid? I mean, you seem to think that it's ironclad. I've heard arguments from very senior lawyers that seem to believe that the EU can just, the commissioners can just ignore it completely.
Well, first of all, the Commission can't ignore it completely because it's signed up to it, but that's actually a minor point. The big issue that you're raising is whether the Court of Justice can ignore it or has to pay attention to it. Actually, it has to pay attention to an international law decision, but leave that aside too. Suppose you don't believe that. The agreement is that the next time there's a treaty, and very clearly the Germans and others want to have a treaty in order to create a much deeper fiscal and political union of those that are inside the Eurozone, we have a veto. It's not in doubt. You consult any lawyer you like anywhere in the world, they'll tell you if they've read the documents, we have a veto over treaties. We will not allow a treaty to be signed unless it includes what is in the international law decision. At that point, it's in the treaties. And it's absolutely ironclad at that stage. So the logic of this is remorseless. What has to be argued by the Leave campaigners, on the contrary, is that it's not enough not to be dragged into the maelstrom or the vortex or whatever of fiscal and political and monetary union. That being just in the single market is by itself such a constraint on our freedom of action that it's well worth moving out. And then we're back to the argument that I'm talking about, and I see that rational people can disagree about that proposition. For my money, it's well worth bearing the problems and difficulties which are admitted of being in the single market for the sake of being in the single market.
One of the things everybody's been very quiet about is the transaction tax, which we know the French are absolutely rubbing their paws to impose upon us. That is in train, that's what the EU have all been talking about. What on earth is the transaction tax going to do for each and every one of you here? It is going to make London less competitive. That's what we're about. We are traders. I'm at the lower end of the scale, I run an SME, but we are traders. That's where the money comes from. And that is a real problem, the transaction tax. And people say to me, oh, everything will go to Frankfurt, it'll go to Paris. So why isn't it there now? It's not there now because we are good at what we do. I go back to the same point. We know what we're doing. Let's reach out. Let's go for those markets. And you're absolutely right. The markets in Africa have been precluded by the EU. We've got markets in India. Nobody really talks about that. The EU has put up trade barriers. Haven't we grown up enough to exceed those trade barriers? I think that's really important. Let's go back. What do we really have to lose? Because Oliver is very eloquent in the way that he's talked about things, but it's all talking about micro decisions that those men, those unelected men in Brussels, and we will have to follow what we're told. There's no way. Come on, you guys are global traders. You know that. And if we have our competitive edge taken away from us, because they will punish us if we stay, I don't think that's a good thing.
Melanie, you mentioned the UK can be better alone, better and bigger. However, the US, for example, has no interest in trading just with the UK. So there is, in addition, I work in my life 18 years in finance as a trader, investment banker in New York, California. And I moved to London because it's the great hub for financial services. And the reason London is the great hub for financial services is because it has the best of the best from all Europe. So not just Britain. As a matter of fact, most investment banks have tons of teams from Germany, France, Spain, Italy, and Portugal. So you are currently benefiting from the best of the best that we brought from Europe. If London is no longer the financial hub for Europe, I'm not sure you can benefit from all the great expertise of that financial talent. So what do you have to say about that?
But why would we want to change? Your point is my point, that London is this wonderful melting pot. This is the city of my birth. It has embraced everyone. It doesn't just have to be Europe. You say that America won't deal with us. Well, okay, what about AIG? Yeah, you know, we've got AIG. I mean, the biggest insurance company in the whole world. You know, all of the, we've got Marsh McLennan, huge brokers. We've got Aon. They're all doing business in London because it works for them. Why on earth would that change? There is nothing that Vote Leave say that says we won't have the brightest and the best. Where on earth, in our long history, have we ever said we won't have the brightest and best? I'm talking about more control for us to choose what we want to do. And no one would imagine that we would want to damage our country. Of course we want the brightest and the best, and that is absolutely right. But let's be global. Let's not look to this restrictive trade bloc. Let's be global.
Thank you. Oh, well, we've got quite a few here. Oh dear, oh dear. This gentleman here.
Moving things away just from the economic argument, what do you think the issue is with Scotland and Northern Ireland and Ireland if we leave? Because Scotland's very, very pro-EU. Obviously, you'd have the whole issue of a border crossing between Ireland and Northern Ireland. Isn't that going to throw a whole kettle of fish up in the air?
I'm actually Northern Irish. Great place. I've travelled. I think that the way that everybody's talking about it is that we're suddenly going to have barriers. I don't believe that. I mean, for goodness sake, the history of Ireland, the north and the south, there have always been people exchanging. We were recently, my husband and I, we were in Enniskillen. Everybody drives down to the south to get the petrol, they come north to get the butter. It's just the way it's always worked. Traders, that's the way that it works. Scotland, well, Scotland and the SNP. Why do they think? You know, they think they don't know whether they want to be part of us, they want to be part of the EU. The EU said they couldn't be on their own. They had their referendum, they got an answer. So everybody on Thursday, everyone in this room has one vote. The Prime Minister has one vote. Nicola Sturgeon has one vote. And it's really important. We're having the debate. Up and down this country, we have all sat around tables having debates. I think it's fantastic for democracy. You may not agree with me, but this is the debate. How brilliant that is for democracy. I don't know what Scotland are going to do. Not everybody in Northern Ireland. My aunt is certainly going to vote out. So there you go.
I mean, I think the point you were making is right. It's not just you that don't know. I don't know. None of us know what will happen in Northern Ireland and its relationship with Ireland, or the internal relationships in the United Kingdom between England and Wales and Scotland. Part of the point about the leap in the dark is that you don't know what's going to happen in those respects. And I think that's the general character of all of these issues. If the nation votes to remain, things on the 24th will look rather similar to things on the 22nd. If the nation votes to leave, of course, over time, we will work out how to deal with it. Of course, this country will go on existing and eventually will learn how to prosper, no doubt. But you are taking a leap in the dark, and there's a series of unknown quantities. And the question you have to ask yourself, it seems to me, is, are those undoubted risks? That's not in question. There are risks. are those undoubted risks worth taking? What is the great gain we get by taking them?
Thank you. This lady.
Hello, Griselda Williams. I studied history, and the last time we had a European Union the like of which we have today was when there was a Roman Empire. When the Romans left in 400 AD, we had 500 years of what was known as the Dark Ages, where we had a subsistence existence. Now, I'm not suggesting that's going to happen again, but let's hope it doesn't. It might. But I have two questions for you, and these are more on a global scale, because you keep talking about this great global opportunity we have. No one actually knows what's going to happen next. I worry. I spent some time living and working in China and working with the Chinese in Africa and investment there. And China is on the brink of a major credit crisis of its own. The state-owned enterprises are defaulting on their loans. We see Chinese investment in property in London. They are defaulting on their deposits and leaving. We're depending on this great international investment from the likes of China, the great global partners. America, what's going to happen there if Trump becomes president of America? What is this great global economy and environment that we think we're so confident to leap into? I mean, right now, yes, there are issues with Europe, and I agree on many, many elements of the fact that there's a lot that needs to be reformed. But is this the moment to be stepping out into an ocean of sharks that are themselves unstable, that are themselves likely to drag them down rather than provide us with the prosperous opportunities that you're promising, which I don't think are real? And I'd love both your views on that, because Oliver, you have China experience, and what your thoughts are. And the second question I have, back to my sort of Roman Empire disintegration, I have a lot of friends in Europe going, whoopee, yes, Britain leave, because it'll generate this disintegration of the European Union and we can all become independent. What's your view of the fact that Europe's actually going to remain intact if this happens? I'm from the south of Ireland, you're from the north. There will be a Schengen border. That's what this gentleman here with the lovely hair was mentioning. A Schengen border is a very serious thing. So back to the two questions. What do you think is the global economy that we are throwing ourselves onto that we think is going to be our future, which is itself shuddering? And what do you think is the fate of the European Union if we actually leave? Because none of you are talking about that.
Oliver?
Well, just to take your questions in reverse order, I don't know is the honest answer to the question of what will happen to the European Union if we choose to leave. I do know something about what will happen as we try to negotiate with it a relationship. Incidentally, what you said is absolutely true. We import more from the European Union than we export to it. And that is an important perspective. I think a more important perspective, however, is it constitutes 40% of our exports, and we constitute 7% of its exports. If you ask yourself, on whose side are the dice loaded, I think I know the answer to that question. And I think the same is true, and it comes to your second question, when we seek to renegotiate the 53 free trade agreements that we currently hold through the European Union, each one of which would need to be renegotiated unless we just go back to the WTO, and when we seek to negotiate with the States once the States is willing to negotiate with us, once it's finished negotiating its agreement with the European Union, and when we seek to negotiate with the Indians and the Chinese. Now, we have the position that in all those cases, we're small, and the things against which we're negotiating are large. I don't say it's impossible to negotiate against people who are larger than you are. It is possible. Indeed, I'm perfectly sure that if we try, we will eventually succeed. But it may be quite a long time, and we can't guarantee in any of those cases the outcomes. And the argument I'm making, therefore, is not that the world is a disaster after you leave, but that there's a period during which this country faces great uncertainties, great costs, and great risks. And I come back to the point, you have to then ask yourself, what is the great prize that we get? What's the thing that is to our advantage so much that those early and undoubted costs and risks are worth bearing?
To me, business is a bit like the flowing of the water, okay? So you flow around where you find your trading, because that's what happened. That's what we've done For hundreds and hundreds of years, we've taken something that was profitable for us for various reasons. War, pestilence, we moved on to another market. That's what we're really, really, really good at. Look at Russia. Lots and lots of companies invested time, embedding, getting experience there, getting those networks. It didn't work. China, I've long said to many friends that China was a panacea for everything. It's not. It's beginning to be rocky. But India, have those big companies really looked at India? Have we looked at South America? What I'm saying is, as business people, in my own industry, the challenges that I'm facing actually at the moment have nothing to do with whether we're in the EU or not. But they're huge challenges. I've been in the market for 35 years. The whole dynamic is changing. Am I going to give up? No. I'm going to look at solutions. That's what everybody in this room looks at, solutions. And there are markets. Nature and history shows that we change our talents and we move with those markets. And that is what I believe, okay?
I don't disagree with you, but how much pain and how long is it going to take that do we have to endure to get there?
But China, you said China's not as great as it was. But there will be other areas that we can trade with. I go back to India. We have touched the surface.
You're relying entirely on India.
No, I'm not.
We look at
I'm
South
just
America.
using that as an
Venezuela's in
example.
tatters. I mean, and that's just the tip
But
of
what
the
about
iceberg of South
Colombia?
America.
What about Colombia? There are lots of vibrant countries in South America. We heat source it. There are lots of people in this room who deal with all sorts of different countries. That's what we do well. That's what we do well. You asked what's going to happen to Europe, okay? I believe that this organization that's seeking more and more fiscal autonomy for amongst these global, the unelected commissioners, is not sustainable. I don't genuinely believe it is. So yes, I'm being selfish on behalf of the British people. Let's get out before they drag us down.
I come back to my fundamental question. How much is it going to cost us and how long is it going to take? You don't know the answer.
Neither does Oliver. Neither does Oliver. On the 23rd, on Thursday, it's your choice. You will balance, each person in this room will balance what we get and what we lose. And it's a personal decision. It's a personal decision. I personally believe that we will lose so much by staying and that we can gain more. I was honest. I said it was like a divorce. I went through that painful process, but my God, it was worth it. Let's not have a debate in 10 years' time and say, why weren't we brave enough? Why weren't we brave enough?
Thank you. So we'll have just one more question, and then we'll wrap it up for refreshments. This gentleman here, I'm afraid.
So I think that kind of hits the nail on the head as to what the issue here is. All the debate is about who's got the certainty about what's going to happen next, and yet there is no certainty. This is really about a choice. And the thing that I'm concerned about is you say that we've got ironclad agreements. The truth is, business doesn't happen on the basis of ironclad agreements. It happens on the basis of relationships. And the truth is, the union wants to head in a direction of ever-increasing union. And if we don't take our chance to exit now, then at the point that they no longer want us because they're so far down their road, they're in full control of what happens next. And it doesn't matter what the agreement says, we'll have lost our chance to actually go in a global world where opportunities are rife. I think the thing about the European Union is it was built in an age which is no longer with us. The age in which this establishment was created no longer exists, and it's no longer fit for purpose. And if we vote to remain, then all that does is give them a mandate to change nothing. It won't create the reform in the EU that we want. I think it just gives them the mandate to do nothing different.
Well, I think the first point is that if there are problems in the European Union in coming years, quite apart from all the structural issues, if there are actual real-life serious problems, which there could be, whether we're in or whether we're out, they will hugely affect us. We shouldn't be under the illusion that somehow or other leaving the EU insulates us from what happens on the continent of Europe. For many centuries, we were not a member of the EU because there wasn't one. And we were not insulated from what went on the continent of Europe. We never will be. So it's hugely in our interests that the countries within the EU remain prosperous and liberal democracies in any event. And I don't think actually leaving changes that in any respect. Second issue is, you're absolutely right that the way things unfold in history depends on not just agreements, but relationships. And actually, the relationship that we have forged with counterpart governments in the EU that are intent on completing the process of monetary union by creating fiscal and political union is one of live and let live, in which they have acceded. This isn't some kind of warfare we've been through. It's a discussion in a rational and sensible way with people whom we knew, and particularly whom David Cameron knows well and has spent many years now talking to, in which they agreed that they would want to move in that direction, and they agreed that we wouldn't, and we won't. And incidentally, we're by no means going to be the only people who won't. One of the problems of reaching the agreement, the final international law decision, was the fear on the part of some people that actually other countries would immediately swoop on what we managed to obtain for ourselves. And I'm absolutely confident that over time, that's what we will see evolving. And we'll see two concentric rings. On the inside, we'll see an evolving political, fiscal, and monetary union, which is more and more like a single country. And on the outer ring, those of us who are part of the single market. And I persist in believing that that is actually a very comfortable position for this country to be in. We're a hinge between Europe and the rest of the world. We always have been. We can continue in that. We have full access to the single market. We have full access to the free trade agreements that the single market has negotiated. We aren't subject to being part of the central core that is a fiscal, political, and monetary union. Now, you may or may not, clearly in your case you don't, share my view that that is a successful place for Britain to locate itself. But if you do think it's a successful place to locate itself, there's only one way to achieve it, and it is now on offer, and that is by voting Remain.
I've read so many of those EU papers. I don't run a think tank, I run a small SME. And I am more and more convinced that actually the direction of travel is for that monetary union, is about federalism, is about making us closer together. And there will be nothing that we can do. We will have lost our power. I didn't make my final decision. I was always slightly Eurosceptic. David Cameron gave us the vote. I think it's really important to say he gave us that vote, and that's really important. He's allowed us to have the debate. He went to Brussels. They understood the domestic problems that he had for being a rich country, for being an attractor of all these people to come. And what did they give us? What did they give us? Was it so hard to ask for 4 years of people being in a country before they were given benefits? No, not so hard. 2 years. 2 years. And that may be fannied away. I'm really sorry. I think we will be giving up our sovereignty. And that's why I will be voting to leave on Thursday.
Thank you very much. That concludes the discussion this evening. On behalf of nonexecutivedirectors.com, thank you very much for joining us this evening, and I'd like to make a special thank you to Oliver and Melanie for their enormous contribution to this Brexit debate. We'd also like to welcome everyone to stay for a while and join us for a drink and some canapes. Thank you.